Let's talk about TNS-names.ora resolution. Just to expand upon this topic a little bit more, the question that came in was when we actually use the wrong name, with a typo or something like that, it takes forever to actually say, yep, sorry, it didn't work out. Or they might even get some odd results, which we'll see shortly, and I thought I'd explain what's going on. When we talk about TNS names, the things that are critical here are there's two concepts to understand. That is of the database domain and the concept of actually resolving a name. And there's two slightly different things here. And I'm going to talk about a domain called world because that was relevant in the premise of the question that came in to this office hours session. The DB domain is a parameter that defines the database domain inside the database. And the reason that's important is when your database registers itself with the listener, it's going to provide that domain information over. Now, in many databases, the domain is null, but a common domain that used to be used in some of the older versions was world. And as a result, most of the services and things that were offered out by the database and hence the listener would have a .world suffix because people had not provided their own, for example, company domain name. When we did a listener control status on the listener on such a machine where the database has a DB domain set to world, one of the old defaults, we would see something like this. The database is offering out some services, but those services would have a .world suffix. And you can see there, in this particular instance, cadb.world was the service that was being offered out. Now, because people would like to connect just to a database called cadb in this case, we didn't want to have to type in the .world. So inside sqlnet.ora, one of the parameters that would often be set as part of installation would be what we call the default domain, which is world. What that meant is when you, for example, tried to connect to a database called cadb, we would automatically suffix .world on the end of it. And then if we looked in our tnsnames.ora, that would be found because we have the entry of cadb.world. So a connection at cadb would go look in sqlnet.ora and say, oh, the default domain is .world, therefore cadb.world is the TNS entry I'm going to be looking at. And as you can see there, we could either fully qualify the name with cadb.world, but if we left that off, that would work just as well. What happens though if we make a typo? I tried this time, I've gone to CAD, I just mistyped the B, I missed it out. I tried to go to cad.world, and obviously I get an error saying that TNS names entry does not exist. But what's not immediately apparent here is how long it takes. That took an eternity to come back and say, yep, sorry, we can't resolve that service name. Now the question is why? That gets onto the concept of resolution as opposed to the domain. If I do a TNS ping on cad.world, and that's a natural thing we would do, I couldn't resolve the identifier, so let's do a TNS ping and see what's going on here. I see a very interesting result. I actually don't see, oh, I just couldn't find it in the TNS names entry. You can see there, it's actually trying to connect to a particular IP address. Now, what exactly is that IP address? The thing that gives us the clue there is this line that's also in there, using the host name to actually try to resolve the name. So let's run an NS lookup on cad.world, and you can see that's where those IP addresses came from. cad.world is actually a standard DNS name. It's an internet address, nothing to do with this particular database, and probably nothing to do with this particular customer. But we went off to this IP address and actually tried to connect to a database there. And obviously there wasn't one in this case. The reason for this is inside our sqlnet.ora is a parameter indicating how we should do TNS names resolution. We can see the names directory path by default is TNS names, the local file, then Oracle names. Now, for those that are perhaps new to the database game, Oracle names is a product that we used to have which would allow centralized TNS names.lookup. It's generally been replaced now with directory lookups, but it offered a similar facility, the concept of centralizing things like your database service names. And if we couldn't find it in Oracle names, we would then do this thing, use the TNS entry to resolve it as a host name. And that's why we actually fell all the way through to here and tried to resolve cad.world as if it was a host name. So if you want to avoid that long-winded delay, all you have to do is remove those two entries. Let's do a demonstration to actually see how this works. So you can see my sqlnet.ora file here, and I'm using the default, namely the TNS names looks locally first, then Oracle names if present, and then a host name resolution. So I'll jump into a simple DOS window. Let's do a TNS ping cad.world, and as you can see, it's tried to resolve to those IP addresses that we saw earlier, and it's taking a long time because I'm reaching out to the outside world, and there's probably firewalls and all sorts of things in play that are simply saying, I'm sorry, you've got the wrong address, there's no database here. And hence that long-winded delay. In fact, I'll even kill it off, it was taking so long. Let's now go look at my sqlnet.ora again, and this time I'll comment out the two entries and just go with a names directory path of TNS names. I'll save that. Let's go back to my screen. Let's try it again. As we know, this is an invalid TNS names, but as we can see, straight away we've stopped. We tried the tnsnames.ora file, it wasn't there, and we're done. So that's the way you can actually look at speeding up your TNS lookups for those rare times that you actually get the information wrong.